All right, welcome to the 6th Street Virtual PIM meeting second round. Just go over a few housekeeping items. First, the team will introduce themselves, and we're going to be utilizing the Q&A function of this Teams meeting. So if you have any questions or any ways that you'd like to respond, please put it into the chat, which we'll be monitoring and answering questions basically as they come in. There are some times to pause throughout the presentation to make sure that we're accurately getting our ideas across. If you have further questions, you can email the project at 6streetproject@hntb.com. You can view these boards and fill out the comment form on the project website, engage.milwaukee.gov/6street, and this meeting will be recorded and posted to that website. So we're going to quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Jesse Doran. I'm with HNTB supporting the City of Milwaukee on this project, and I'm overseeing the public involvement process. Mike?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Mike Hammond. We're for HNTB Corporation here in Milwaukee, working on behalf of the City of Milwaukee Department of Public Works on this project. I'm serving as consultant project manager.
Tim?
Tim Keefe with HNTB, also a project engineer on the 6th Street project.
And David.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Tapia. I am the project manager from the city side here at the Department of Public Works. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who is online now and hopefully will be joining or reviewing this at a later date. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to our presentation, get some information, and hopefully give us and the design team some feedback when it's convenient for you. So hope you enjoy what we've put together and you get a lot of good information out of it.
Again, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please utilize the Q&A function and we'll answer those questions as they come in. So our agenda, we're going to get a brief project overview and the feedback we've heard so far. We're going to go through the selection process and how we arrived at our preferred alternative. After the preferred alternative, we'll talk about some Section 4F impacts and then go through final feedback and takeaways. Again, we're open for questions at any time, so please put them in the Q&A. So a quick overview of the project. This is 6th Street from National Ave to North Ave. The project will better connect the north and south side neighborhoods to downtown. Initially, this project was awarded a $36.5 million neighborhood access and equity capital construction grant. However, and the City of Milwaukee entered into a $2.1 million grant agreement to cover preliminary design and the environmental documentation. However, as part of the big, beautiful bill that passed last July, the unallocated funding was rescinded, and so we are just finishing the design process with that $2.1 million. Once we are to that 30% design, the City of Milwaukee will look to find other ways to fund the project as it moves forward. This is called 6th Street Next. We're using the past and the present to now inform the future. So here we have a picture of 6th Street then. We have 6th Street now, and then we're looking forward to 6th Street next. The project features, we're trying to improve pedestrian accommodations, add new transit lanes and enhance stops wherever feasible, fully separate bike lanes wherever feasible, increase the tree canopy, landscaping, and other green infrastructure. We want to right-size the roadway and do complete pavement reconstruction for a portion of the corridor. This is part of Mayor Johnson's transportation vision and his commitment to Vision Zero, a goal of zero traffic deaths and serious injuries in the City of Milwaukee. We're also supporting the vision of expanding the protected bikeway network, focusing on complete streets, and improving the vibrancy of public spaces. This project comes out of the Connecting Milwaukee Downtown 2040 plan. It was identified as one of the catalytic projects, turning 6th Street into a complete street, which would be redesigning it as a priority transit and enhanced bikeway. Throughout that process, residents supported designing streets that are walkable, safe, and have more space for people walking and less space for vehicles. It's been identified on the bike priority network and the transit priority network. So this is our second round of public involvement. In our first round, we have a brief summary of what we heard. We engaged with stakeholders both at the City of Milwaukee and with MCTS. We heard that the corridor is not cohesive, but it does serve a variety of uses and users. There's a lot of potential throughout the corridor for identity gateway and for identity and gateway signage. And then certain intersections feel very large, especially Michigan, Kilbourne, and McKinley. We engaged with a variety of stakeholders along the corridor, including the Baird Center, Downtown Milwaukee, MATC, the Nature and Culture Museum of Wisconsin, Walker's Point Association, just to name a few. And what we heard repeatedly is that it's a barrier for 6th Street is a barrier for people that are walking, so better crossings are needed. Corridor would benefit from pedestrian wayfinding signage, and this corridor serves as an important access point for large events, for deliveries, and for customers. A brief summary of the engagement we heard from our first round of public involvement meetings is that 6th Street is an important artery to move people through the city, but the street feels unsafe. Vehicles move too fast and the pavement quality is poor. So using that information, we moved through a selection process and the preferred alternatives. So I'll pass it over to Mike to go over how we selected our preferred alternative.
Great, thanks, Jesse. Yeah, so we'll first start with the purpose and need for the project and the corridor as a whole. Purpose and need is really the driving force behind why we're doing the project. And when we look at the transportation decision-making process aligns with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which helps define that decision-making process. So when we look at the 6th Street corridor, and what we've heard in terms of our initial engagement with some of the stakeholders along this corridor and the public as a whole, you can see the purpose statement on the slide here: redesigning and rebuilding 6th Street to improve safety and operations, efficiency, and connectivity among all modes of transportation. So that's really the driving force behind what we're doing when we make decisions on this project. And then there's a variety of needs that actually sort of need to be addressed when we look at the corridor as a whole, and those really formed the foundation of our decision-making process. So you can see those bullets on the left-hand side of the screen in terms of thinking about connectivity and walkability when we looked at the alternatives for this corridor. Certainly pavement conditions within certain stretches and addressing poor pavement condition. Green infrastructure, really working to address stormwater and rain where it falls within impervious surfaces and redirecting that to green infrastructure where possible. Safety, taking a look at existing crashes that are out there today and unsafe conditions and working to address those with the project. And then finally, traffic operations, certainly acknowledging that this is a roadway with vehicular traffic on it, and across the different segments of the roadway, there is different jurisdictions of who maintains the jurisdictional operations of that roadway, and that's something that we've also been keeping in mind as we evaluated the various alternatives. So we've talked a little bit, as you've heard me mention segments a couple of times already. The way we've thought about this project, both at the first public meeting and in this second phase of public engagement, as we looked across different alternatives, was really dividing the corridor into 4 segments, starting at the far southern end from National Avenue to the roundabout is the first segment. And then you see that purple segment in the map, roundabout to Clybourne Street being the second segment, then red Clybourne Street to McKinley, and then the final segment to the north, McKinley to North Avenue. As Jesse notes here on the slide, there will be Q&A. So basically after each section, so what we'll do is we'll kind of run through the alternatives that have been proposed, where our preferred alternative landed, certainly time for Q&A. Jesse notes the virtual comment form on our website. And then I'll also note that on that same website, we did host an in-person public meeting last night. For those of you who weren't able to make that, we do have materials from that public meeting also available on the website for review that mirrors some of the info that we're sharing in today's presentation. So with that, we'll get into the first segment. National Avenue to roundabout. So this is that far southern segment. I'll start on the left-hand side of the screen. You can see that existing image taken of this segment today. And then right below that, you can see an illustrated cross-section of that roadway today as well. So we have one travel lane in each direction, parking, and then sidewalks. You can see on the right-hand side, just some existing condition stats that we'll note across each corridor, about 9,400 vehicles a day. In terms of speeds, posted speed limit in this segment is 30 miles per hour. Average speed around 28 miles per hour. 31% of the traffic is going over that speed limit. Both of those speed stats are really, likely influenced by the surrounding context and land use of this corridor, as it is somewhat different from the other segments that we're looking at. So when we thought about potential solutions or alternatives for this segment from National Avenue to the roundabout, very similar. On the far left side, you can see what we called our green corridor, one travel lane in each direction with some space for green infrastructure on one side and then one side having parking. So really allowed for sort of some flexibility in terms of how that curbside space was used. The one on the right, very similar. It's called wide sidewalks because it would widen the sidewalks and then somewhat reduce the available space for green infrastructure and parking, but still allowing for some of that flexibility between those two based on the surrounding land uses. So next, this sort of gets to our selection criteria. You heard me talk about the purpose and need. There'll be a slide like this for each segment. So I'll just introduce you to the idea on this one. On the table on the left-hand side, I won't go through each of those, but really, as it notes on the top there, purpose and need. So that goes through all of our purpose and need factors, and then assesses each alternative to determine whether they meet the purpose and need for the project. As you can see with this segment, really both of the alternatives, as you noted, were very similar. They all meet the purpose and need of the project and the different need factors that we have. On the right-hand side, you can see some feedback we received from the public at our first round of public engagement. Certainly a lot of interest in wider sidewalks, but also acknowledging that parking and greening the corridor were other priorities for folks that visited us at our first public involvement meeting. So we took all of that and identified a preferred alternative. You can see on the left-hand side is an illustrated cross-section. On the right-hand side is a conceptual 3D rendering of the preferred alternative. And really, when you think back to those alternatives that we proposed, what you're seeing on the screen is really a hybrid or a combination of both. So it has one travel lane in each direction, maintains space for parking and green infrastructure on the sides, as well as widening that sidewalk. And you can see that area in blue that's identified in the cross section. That's really what we've identified as flex space. And you can see that playing out within the conceptual rendering as well, as we sort of provide space for parking, but in certain locations that could also be turned into green infrastructure or areas for planting. Again, really meeting the need that we heard from folks from a parking perspective while still greening up the corridor. The last thing I'll note in the conceptual rendering, sorry, Jesse, is just on that conceptual rendering there on Pierce Street, you will see a lighter gray concrete there that does indicate a raised intersection. It is something that we've looked at as a project team across the corridor at various unsignalized intersections, really calming the traffic, reducing speeds, and improving the overall safety of the street. So Jesse's got kind of this summary slide pulled up here. You can see the cross section of that rendering again. And then what you see in the center of the screen is a snip from our roll plot, sort of a plan view of the design as it exists at this preliminary phase. We'll pause there and happy to answer any questions about this particular segment.
So if you have questions, please just throw them in the Q&A and we'll answer them as they come up.
We can certainly kind of always jump back if we see things popping up in the Q&A, so don't feel like it's a mad rush to submit something. We can maybe keep going, and we'll certainly loop back if we see anything pop up. Okay. Second segment, as noted, was from the roundabout north to Clybourne Street. Same format as we just went through with the last segment. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the existing conditions. This picture, the existing today photo is taken looking north from Canal Street. You can see the cross section also matches that location right below that in terms of 2 travel lanes in each direction with a striped bike lane. I will note that there is a variation in the cross section that exists within this segment. North of Canal is what you see on the screen. To the south of Canal, the city has recently completed a traffic calming project along that stretch that reduces it to 1 travel lane in each direction with some jersey barriers separating the bike lane from traffic. On the right-hand side of the screen, sorry, you can just see that average daily traffic again, 14,000 vehicles, quite a bit higher than that last segment, and some speed data in terms of the posted speed limit being about 30 and average speeds being over that at 34 miles per hour, with 77% of the traffic we saw going over that 30 mile per hour mark. Next slide goes over the proposed alternatives that we shared at our last phase of public engagement. They're all fairly similar to each other, so I'll try to just highlight some of the major differences. Starting at the top, a fairly traditional roadway cross-section, one travel lane in each direction with one bike lane on each side. You can see a sort of a striped barrier separating that traffic from the bike lane, and then the sidewalk. This segment is on viaduct or on a bridge for good portions of it, so we are somewhat limited in terms of the improvements that we make within this corridor. So that sort of serves as the foundation in terms of what that sidewalk looks like, and you can see some of the bridge elements that we've shown to kind of indicate that difference within this segment. I'll transition to the bottom left there. That's the second alternative. You can see it provides a two-way bike lane on the west side, as well as a one northbound direction bike lane on the other side there on the east side. And really the main impetus behind that in terms of the two-way bike lane was this segment does connect to the Hank Aaron State Trails south of Canal Street with a sort of a looping ramp. We heard from a lot of stakeholders that they were very interested in a seamless connection to the Hank Aaron State Trail. So we felt like that two-way bike lane would really provide that connection, not requiring people, regardless of their direction of travel on their bike, to cross the street to get into an additional bike lane. They can stay on that west side of the structure to connect to the Hank Aaron State Trail. And then on the right side, the third alternative that we looked at was just that two-way bike lane, doesn't include that single northbound bike lane. In order to use up the space that's there in terms of the roadway cross-section, you can see striped medians. So that would just be sort of paint or pavement markings that would indicate that striped median outside of the intersection area. So when we take a look at the selection criteria for this segment, you can see for the most part, all the alternatives met it. For the two-way protected bike lane that didn't have a northbound bike lane paired with it, we were a little concerned about the safety in terms of traffic calming, and that striped median really providing a wide roadway cross-section that might encourage traffic behavior or speeding in this case. And then you can see that red N in terms of the feedback we received. In general, we also heard that from stakeholders, a concern of that striped median. But the other two alternatives really did meet the purpose and need that we evaluated for this segment. In terms of the preferred alternative, again, sort of a combination hybrid on this one. So I'll sort of separate the corridor based on the rendering that you see here. The conceptual rendering is at Canal Street. So the Harley-Davidson Museum is to the top of the rendering. And really what we took a look at is different alternatives based on Canal Street. So you can see on the left-hand side there in terms of the cross sections north of Canal all the way to Clybourne, we envisioned one travel lane in each direction with one bike lane in each direction on each side, sort of providing a very traditional roadway cross section. But then south of Canal, we are looking to implement that two-way bike lane on the west side paired with that northbound bike lane on the east side. Again, really focused on providing that seamless connection for folks using the Hank Aaron State Trail, which continues along Canal Street and makes that connection south of Canal Street. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Yes, Mike, we have two questions. The first one, what's the sentiment for installing BRT type bus boarding platforms at stations along the corridor with high ridership? Is there anything preventing that as an upgrade?
Yeah, it's a level of detail that we haven't gotten into yet at this design level, but certainly for good stretches of the corridor, we do envision in-lane bus stops and certainly level boarding platforms or BRT type boarding platforms could be considered at high ridership stops.
All right, and then another question is, when will the roundabout design be discussed, including how the two adjacent segments interact with it? Obviously, this roundabout has an enormous impact on how people move through and think about moving through the 6th Street corridor.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's always hard for our project team in terms of how much detail to show in a virtual setting like this. I would first point to there is a roll plot design on our website that shows the details of the entire corridor in terms of how different segments interact. I would say in general, with the roundabout that's noted to the south of this segment, that was something that our team has taken a look at. In general, the preferred alternative incorporates basically a formalization of some of the improvements that the city has made out there recently in terms of that roundabout. So the preferred alternative does envision that roundabout staying. In general, we do envision sort of directing, in particular, bike traffic through that roundabout on the west side. And then once that bike traffic gets to the south of the roundabout, actually taking that bike traffic over to 5th Street, which the city has identified as a likely future bike corridor. Okay, certainly keep those questions coming. We can always go back to certain segments if we see more questions.
Mike, may I be able to jump in and make a brief note?
Yep.
I just wanted to note, you may notice some slight differences between the alternatives that were analyzed and the preferred alternatives in terms of exact width, say, of the sidewalk, for example. And I think it's important to point out, especially in this segment, that the intent is not to change the width of the bridge structure. Really, the variation between some of the alternatives and the preferred alternative that is shown just comes into play that when the alternatives were being developed, we had preliminary planning level right-of-way information that we developed those on, and as design progressed, we got actual survey to tighten up those numbers. So that's really what the difference is when you see those minor differences in widths.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Tim. Okay, the third segment, what some of us on the project team call the downtown segment, from Clybourne Street to McKinley Avenue. You can see on the left-hand side existing conditions today. There's a picture of the corridor. In terms of the cross-section, it really does vary across this segment. So there's no sort of typical cross-section in terms of the width that's out there. But in general, we do see 2 driving lanes in each direction, parking along some stretches of the corridor, and various levels of sidewalk width. In terms of the daily traffic, around 15,000 vehicles, by far the highest traffic levels that we see across the various segments are in the downtown segment. Speeds, again, posted speed limit 30 miles per hour. We're seeing an average speed of around 33. 61% of traffic is going over the speed limit and close to 20% going over 40 miles per hour. In terms of the proposed alternative, we looked at quite a few in this segment. I'll cover the top 2 and then the bottom 2. So the top 2 are really what we heard from stakeholders throughout this process was an interest in dedicated transit lanes, but also an interest in protected bike infrastructure within this corridor. And so you'll see across both of those alternatives on the top, I'll start on the left side. You can see there's center running dedicated transit lanes. So that would mean buses have their own lanes in the center of the roadway, and then 1 travel lane in each direction, and then a protected bike facility that would be at sidewalk level. In the alternatives that we showed, the bike lanes could have been on each side or paired together on one side. We had different flexibility there across these various alternatives. As we move to the right of that, to the second alternative, outside transit and protected bike lanes, very similar, but in this case, the transit would be on the outside lanes, and then you would still have that protected bike sidewalk level bike facility on either both sides or together on one side, 1 travel lane in each direction still under that scenario. And then the bottom 2 are different in terms of they do not have 1 travel lane in each direction, but have 2 travel lanes in each direction. In the bottom left corner, you can see 4 driving lanes and protected bike lane. The name is fairly explanatory in terms of what you're seeing, 2 travel lanes in each direction and protected bike lanes that are sidewalk level on each side. There would not be dedicated transit lanes under this alternative. And then the bottom right alternative named all modes, because really it's us trying to achieve all modes. And so we have dedicated transit in the center with some interaction with turn lanes depending on different intersections, 2 travel lanes in each direction, and then you've got that protected sidewalk level bike facility 2-way on the west side of the street. One thing I would call attention to in the all modes alternative is somewhat limited space for green infrastructure and planting. And that was really something that we heard from a lot of stakeholders and was a key part of our purpose and need. So this one was definitely a bit more complex in terms of evaluating the different alternatives. You can see our preliminary evaluation on the right-hand side of the screen there. I'll start with the far right in terms of the all modes. That's the alternative we just discussed. In general, you'll see a couple red ends there, and that's really reflective of the really wide cross section that the all modes alternative produced. With limited spots for medians, limited space for pedestrian refuge, really impacted the connectivity of folks crossing 6th Street, limited opportunities to green the corridor with planting and green infrastructure, and that wide cross section, our team was concerned about leading to increased speeding in the corridor and therefore not improving the safety of the corridor. So all modes was not considered when compared to the other 4. And then I'll handle the 2 on the left-hand side that provided dedicated transit lanes. So certainly, as we talk to stakeholders, the public coordinated with Milwaukee County Transit System, we definitely understand that this is a key spine of the transit system. And so we did look at those options that provided dedicated transit lanes. Unfortunately, when we took a look at it, 1 travel lane in each direction to allow that did have some cause for concern in terms of the traffic operations that are out there. So this stretch within downtown of 6th Street is called a connecting highway. So it's under the jurisdiction of the Wisconsin Department of Transportation in terms of their preferences and standards for operations and traffic. And so the 1 travel lane in each direction did not meet those operational thresholds. And so by process of elimination, you can see that the one we've decided to move forward with is the 4 lanes plus protected bike lanes. We can maybe go to the next slide to show that one, Jesse. So you can see on the left-hand side there, 2 travel lanes in each direction. You'll see that blue hatching again in this one. That's kind of that flex space. Certainly might be able to provide parking in some spaces, might be looking at green infrastructure and plantings in others. And then you do have that sidewalk level protected bike lane, 1 in each direction next to the sidewalk there. And then I'll also highlight on the cross section unique to this segment, you'll see those asterisks above the bus lane, above the buses in that outer driving lane. And you can see the footnote there. Really our team, again, recognize the importance of this corridor from bus and transit within the city of Milwaukee. So this design could allow for future consideration and implementation of dedicated transit in those outer lanes, depending on how traffic might change in the future. So we would envision that there'd be in-lane bus stops and buses would be using that outer lane. So it would really still allow for efficient bus operations and potentially consideration of dedicated lanes in the future. Again, this is our summary slide. Jesse's got a snippet of the roll plot on the screen as well, which the full version's on our website, but certainly open to comments or questions from folks.
No new questions so far. Oh, there is one new question so far. Could you explain more what the DOT thresholds for traffic operations? What DOT thresholds were not met by the first 2 alternatives?
Yeah, so by the first 2 alternatives, Jesse, can you just confirm? Yep. Oh yeah, sorry, no, I got it. The dedicated transit lanes, I get it. Yep. Yeah, so I would say in general, yeah, there are, as noted, there are operational thresholds. So both DOT and the city of Milwaukee look at traffic operations from a level of service perspective. And so at a number of intersections and locations across the 6th Street corridor within downtown, the alternatives with dedicated transit lanes did not meet those level of service thresholds. Those go all the way from A being free flow traffic all the way to F indicating severe congestion. We were seeing a number of intersections operating at level of service F across the corridor, particularly within the afternoon or PM peak period.
Again, if you have additional questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we can always move backwards.
And I'll just note, I see a note from Jeff Sponcia in terms of bus stop location. I think, Jeff, we hear you loud and clear. I think we've certainly been coordinating with Milwaukee County in terms of the locations of those, and also heard from stakeholders in terms of potential preferences for where those stops align at Wisconsin. Future design phases would definitely unpack that Wisconsin Avenue bus stop location in more detail, including coordination with stakeholders. Okay. Last but not least is the northern segment. This goes from McKinley all the way to North Avenue. Used to it by now, you can see the existing photo on the left, cross section below that, 2 travel lanes in each direction, on-street bike lane and parking, as well as planting strip and sidewalk in some locations. Got about 11,000 vehicles here, so less than in that downtown segment. From a speeding perspective, posted speed limit is 30 here. We see quite a bit of speeding in this location, 84% of traffic going over the speed limit, 20% going over 40 miles per hour or greater. I would note that the speed data in particular was collected where you see that photo taken right at the bottom of the hill, so that change in grade is likely influencing some of the speeding that we're seeing. Proposed alternatives, fairly similar to each other. I'll start on the top. 1 travel lane in each direction, fairly wide median, space for planting, space for parking and transit shelters, in-lane bus stops, as well as significant space for greening of the corridor in that sort of sidewalk or pedestrian realm with 1 bike lane in each direction, or could be paired to be bidirectional bike lanes on one side. Below that is really, something that when our team started to take a look at the top cross section, we identified, wow, there's a lot of space that's out here that we don't necessarily need to utilize all of it. So this looks at a somewhat narrowed cross section to still sort of provide the same cross-section elements for each mode with 1 travel lane in each direction and protected bike lanes, but then identifying, is there the potential that right-of-way could be vacated and given to other uses along the side of the roadway to use up some of that excess space. So when we look at the selection criteria, you can see on the right side of the screen there, a lot of yeses. Both of these alternatives, again, address connectivity in terms of all the modes that are out there, improve pavement conditions, provide quite a few opportunities for green infrastructure while improving the safety of the corridor. You can see really the only change there is that orange box in the vacated right-of-way column. And that really is a reflection of the public feedback and stakeholder feedback that we received on this segment. I think certainly people understood the value and potential of that vacated right-of-way, but we did also see a lot of concerns in terms of the implementation of what that looked like, in terms of would that land be given to adjacent property owners? How would we set up that land in a way to make sure that it could be maintained for a vibrant community into the future? And so based on that feedback, we have identified that the protected bike lane option would be the preferred alternative moving forward. You can see that on the screen here. On the left-hand side, the cross section, again, fairly wide median, space for planting, 1 travel lane in each direction with in-lane bus stops where appropriate. Fairly wide sidewalk pedestrian realm, really providing a unique space within Milwaukee. We think, a lot of planting, double row of trees potentially along each bike lane on each side of the street, as well as that continued sidewalk space for pedestrians using the corridor. The rendering on the right side is an intersection that might be familiar to some. This is 6th Street and Walnut Street. So the city did do some intersection improvements on that corridor that I know we've heard some stakeholder feedback about. And so you can see the potential changes that an alternative like this would allow for at the intersection of Walnut and 6th Street with those sidewalk level bike facilities, pulling in the curb, really cleaning up traffic operations at that intersection with this alternative. So here we are at our summary slide. Jesse's got the snippet of the roll plot that shows you kind of how this design gets passed throughout the corridor. Happy to answer any questions or receive comments from folks on this segment.
All right, as we wait, I think we can just go on to our final section 4F.
Yeah, so Section 4F, as Jesse referred to it as, that is a section within the United States Department of Transportation Act, which, as noted on the screen, provides consideration of park and recreational lands. And so as a part of that National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, that I referenced earlier, that's one of the key things that our team is working on right now, is to finalize that NEPA document. As a part of that, we do need to identify potential impacts to recreational resources and provide the opportunity for the public to comment on some of those impacts. And so there's really two potential major, or not major, but two impacts to 4F resources within this corridor. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see James W. Beckham Park. For those not familiar, that's at the very northern end of the project. That's a very small potential temporary easement for grading. You can see the estimate there, 0.04 acres, really just a strip along the sidewalk for us to be able to come in there, reconstruct and replace that sidewalk as a part of this corridor. The Hank Aaron State Trail, for those unfamiliar, we referenced it earlier, that's sort of in the middle of the corridor as it intersects with the viaduct there. A temporary detour would likely be needed during construction as we implement some of these improvements. As in notes on the screen there, we are coordinating quite closely with Wisconsin DNR around potential detours of that would be needed during construction.
So we do have one question about the entire corridor. How many raised crosswalks or intersections are we looking at deploying throughout the whole corridor?
Yeah, I'll say I don't have the number memorized off the top of my head, but I'll say two things would be one, mentioned the roll plot online a couple times. That's available on our website that you can certainly look at. I would say in general, we really only look at raised crosswalks and intersections in the far southern segment and the far northern segment. And generally, when we're talking about raised intersections, that's going to occur at unsignalized intersections. There's one at Pierce on the southern segment, and then the northern segment from McKinley to North has a couple unsignalized intersections that we are proposing for raised intersections, and then a couple raised crosswalks near James W. Beckham Park on the northern end of the corridor as well. But again, roll plot is available online, which shows all those, and there is the ability to fill out the comment form online or email us with questions to follow up once you've had a chance to review that roll plot. Okay. In terms of schedule and next steps, we've already talked quite a few times about where we are and where we've been, but as we advance through the project, you can see we're just having the second phase of public engagement. As noted, our next big task this summer is to complete that NEPA document that will sort of solidify the preferred alternative, evaluate potential environmental impacts of the preferred alternative, and that would really finish this phase of the project. And then you can see that yellow box, final design and construction, and everybody wants to know when's this going to happen. It is to be determined. So as Jesse noted, the funding for construction of the project was rescinded through that one big beautiful bill. The city is working to identify future funding for the project. There is the potential and likely future indication that there would be a WISDOT connecting highway project in this segment between Wells and McKinley. So we'll certainly be coordinating with the Department of Transportation to advance that project, but there is no definitive timeline on that project at this time.
Mike, we have one question about the detours at the Hank Aaron State Trail. Can you speak more to what's being considered, and will the pathway behind the Harley Museum be affected, which loops under 6th Street?
Yeah, I think I can talk at a high level, and certainly if Tim's available to jump in, he can too. I would say, still very much in the early phases. I think what it comes down to is, as we look at sort of staging the construction of the project, there's likely to be impacts on different sides of the street at different times. And so as we look to basically navigate bicyclists to and from that Hank Aaron State Trail, particularly on the west side, there would be a time and place at which during construction that west side would be closed due to that construction. And so a lot of the detours activity we'd be having with Wisconsin DNR would be looking at basically how do we transition bicyclists potentially to that east side of the street and then can reconnect them with that Hank Aaron State Trail connection on the west side. Whether we're asking bicyclists to go further south, whether there would be a potential mid-block crossing, those are all kind of things that we would consider. There would not be any impacts to that pathway behind the Harley Museum as it relates to this conversation.
Nothing to add, Mike. That's exactly right.
And how long are we accepting feedback on the preferred alternatives? I think that's in our, oh, it's not in our final slide, but we are accepting feedback until May 14th on the online comment form.
Okay, well, certainly we can let more questions filter in if they're there. Jesse's got the slide pulled up. As noted a couple times, comment forums on our website. A lot of the presentation materials that we shared today, as well as exhibits and roll plots from that public meeting, are on the project website for review. And then certainly if there's more specific questions, that email is available as well.
One question just came in. Throughout our public and stakeholder engagement, has there been any segment of the public that has been vocal about maintaining all traffic lanes and keeping this 6th Street a major motorist corridor?
I would say in general, the words major motorist corridor were probably not used by the stakeholders that we interacted with. I would say though, in the downtown segment, I think we did hear some stakeholder and public feedback really around concern around alternatives that transition that to one travel lane in each direction. I think in general, we've also heard from folks, based on their specific concerns around turn lanes in certain locations, in particular at Canal Street on that second segment. We've had quite a few conversations there around queues that occur. So certainly I don't think that was a major theme, but I think we definitely have heard some feedback just around keeping considerations open for accommodating that vehicular traffic. I know we've thrown a lot at folks. We can give it another minute to get in any questions. We'll certainly happy to stay and answer those. And then as always, if you walk away from this virtual meeting and you've got more questions that pop into your head, certainly utilize that comment forum or the email that Jesse's got on the screen. Okay, I'm not seeing anything on my end. Jesse, you seeing anything?
Nope.
Great. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap this virtual public meeting. Really appreciate the feedback and questions in the chat today. And certainly, as noted, reach out if you have any further questions and use that comment form to share your feedback.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.